of our lives weren't just background noise, but blueprints of our becoming. Tonight on Sacred Harmony, we are tuning in the magnetic Rose Leopold, authenticity and intimacy coach, speaker, writer, and a soulful guide through the emotional terrain of embodiment and self expression. From healing through chronic illness to blending theater, psychology, and sex work into a unique path of service. Rose invites us to explore music, not just as a sound, but as a soul language. This isn't a conversation, it's a vibe. So, Rose, what role did music play in your personal transformation? And when did it become more than just something to listen to?
Well, I have always loved music. Since I was a child, I have especially really loved singing. And yeah, so there's always been, and I grew up in Texas. I grew up listening to a lot of country music, Christian rock, and musical theater. Musical theater, especially, was my soul language at the time. But it wasn't until I experienced my, um, I'll call it my awakening, right? A big shift in radical self-awareness that I really started using music as a mirror to for self-reflection. After, let's see, this was six 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago now, 6.5 years ago, that I went through this huge shift in my personal journey, and I started employing a lot of transpersonal psychology, that lens in how I viewed the world. And for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know what transpersonal psychology is, it's a branch of Jungian psychology, so Carl Jung, that essentially views our external world as a mirror of our internal world, and through that, we can use the external world, our preferences, the things that trigger us, what we tend to attract, and other patterns in our life. We can use those for self-reflection and self-refinement if we choose. And so I started using more and more of my relationships, including my relationship with music, for self-reflection. And there were a number of ways that stood out that I did this. So one of them was recognizing, okay, what are the types of music that I have a difficult time like harmonizing with or enjoying? Because just like with people, like if there's a certain kind of person that tends to, push our buttons the wrong way, right? And we feel poked by them, there's probably something that we can learn there. They're offering us an opportunity to grow. So likewise, I started taking notice of what are the kinds of music that I have a hard time like enjoying, right? And a lot of that was like trap music and like heavy metal. And I started noticing this pattern of, oh, I actually have a hard time enjoying music that doesn't have lyrics. It's difficult for me to let go of my mind and just let my body get like lost in the sound, without there being words to hold on to. So that was a really fruitful self reflection and really gave me an opportunity to lean into surrendering more to music, especially music that either didn't have lyrics or that I couldn't understand the lyrics to. Um, and I also started realizing that there was a huge bias in the music that I had traditionally listened to, in that most of the artists that like were my favorite artists were men, were all males, and that's great. I love my male artists, and at a point in my life where I was really focused on developing my inner feminine, leaning into my feminine pole and what does femininity look like for Rose, it became a really powerful practice to at the same time intentionally increase my my repertoire of female artists in my playlist on my Spotify, to lean into what do women sound like, right? And what's a wider variety of female songwriters and artists, what does that sound like to me? Where are my preferences there? Which ones do I resonate with most? Again, just as a mirror for self-reflection. And I came to do that practice, especially after realizing that while music had always been a big deal to me, um, once I started dating, my my music history and I could catalog like all the different phases in my life based on the music that I was listening to at the time. And I started realizing that that catalog was really dependent on who I was dating at the time. That not only was it a particular phase of music, but that music was tended to be based on the music choices of my partner, of my boyfriend at the time. And so a way for me to reclaim my identity as an individual and to expand more into, okay, and who is that? Who is Rose? Was through expanding my exposure to all different kinds of music and just experiencing who am I in the reflection, right, in the mirror of this particular music.
That's amazing. So, can you recall a song or album that felt like it cracked you open during a pivotal life moment?
I really love the artist Fia, Fia. She is she's just so she everything I've ever heard from her is just so obviously from her heart, from her soul. Um, she sings about very deep, very real topics like about becoming, about self-actualizing, about um being someone who feels a lot in a world that doesn't always like honor that, right? And she was one of, if not the most pivotal artist for me during that phase where I was really leaning into listening to more female artists. Uh, Specific songs by her. She has one. It's called is it called Codes of Light? I Am is a really great song by her. All of her stuff, anything I've heard from by her, I've always really enjoyed. Isla Niero is another artist who I really enjoy. Um, oh, and then there's a duo that I really like. What is their name? I'm actually like really terrible with artist names and albums, like compared to how well I remember lyrics. Um, so yeah, so that's why why I'm struggling with this question.
Mhm. That's all right. It's wild how melodies can feel like mentors. Like they know something about us we haven't even said out loud.
It is, and I feel like I feel like the logic there, if we need to like put logic to it, right, is not that we do, but just I love like commingling the logic and the spiritual or the intuitive. And I feel like that's because like when we listen to when we listen to a song, right, that someone else wrote, someone else sings, in the creation of that song, it was birthed from a specific energy. And that energy channeled through that person or those people is what created the thing that I then end up listening to, right? And so while what's there more superficially is the lyrics, is the tempo, the beat, right? The melody. What's underneath that that I can feel even more than I can put into words is an energy. Like I can feel I have some sense of that energy that gave birth to that creation of a song. And maybe I'm already in touch with that energy for myself, but maybe I'm not. And I think that's often when we end up feeling uh when we cry, you know, in the reflection of a song, or when it triggers anger, or when we don't quite know what to do with it, or maybe we feel the urge to dance, right? Is that energy is wanting to flow through us. It's inspiring something in us. even more than just the words, right, or just the melody. There's an energy that gave birth to that song through another human. And we can then feel that energy, and it translates into, okay, what does this energy birth in me?
Absolutely. So, you speak about choosing music consciously. What does that look like in practice, and how can others do the same?
Well, I'll say that that has changed. Like, there was definitely a time when I was very strict about the stories, the lyrics that I listened to, realizing like, oh, like, input equals output. Like, what I listen to is what I end up, speaking back out to the world. I don't want to listen to messages that are not what I want to be, giving and enacting to my experience. So there was a time when I was, I'll say, sensitive enough and going through like a huge recalibration reset, and didn't have like grade A boundaries, right? And so I needed to be very picky about especially the lyrics that I listened to, in so that I didn't end up feeding old patterns of negativity that I was putting a lot of work into, like, resetting. Um, over time, I have become more gentle about that. I have stopped giving music so much power, right? It is very powerful, but now I'm like, hey, if I want to listen to this like grungy rap song that is about things that I wouldn't, dream of doing, because it's fun and it gets into my body and I dance, right? Like that's awesome. Like that's awesome too. But there was definitely a time where that was not something that I could per se tolerate without it having a negative effect on me, similar to like recovering from a food allergy, right? Like I used to be able to not eat gluten. Now I can eat some gluten. I don't even notice, right? But there's a time for healing where we can't necessarily tolerate something that we are having a negative reaction to until we recalibrate and build our positive energy up high enough and make it coherent enough that we're not negatively affected by whatever the thing was that was negatively affecting us. So that's one way that I choose music consciously. Another way is just like when I'm listening to a song, if I start to notice myself feeling some kind of way, right? Similar to if I was having a conversation with a human and I start to notice myself feeling some kind of way, sad, angry, uh uh lonely, grieving, etc. Uh, I ask myself why. Why does this feel pokey to me? Where am I feeling that in my body? And sometimes um I use that as a practice to for catharsis, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let this music move that energy in me. I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna like let my body somatically release. Sometimes, like for example, this didn't happen, but if, for example, I was listening to some music right before we got on our call and a song came on, I'm just like going through my like songs and a song comes on randomly and I start feeling really angry for some reason in response to the song. I'm probably not going to, and we're about to get on the call in like 2 minutes. I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out and process that anger, and instead we'll just set a boundary with it and be like, okay, I'm skipping this song. Probably at that point, time to stop listening to music and just be in silence and get ready for the call, right? So there are ways to go about that where, just like anything, do I want to set a boundary with this and come back into my sovereignty that way, or do I want to use this as an experience for catharsis and allow that emotion to flow through and process and ultimately come back around to my sovereignty in that way. Other ways that I have listened to music consciously. Yeah, I feel like that's more or less it. Oh, this is another. This has been a more recent shift that I'm practicing is when I find myself desiring music, music or just like audible beauty, right? So maybe it's music, maybe it's poetry, maybe it's just talking, right? And using insightful language. Something I've been practicing lately is not always relying on a recording to give me that, right? So either singing to myself more intentionally or seeking out conversation with another human and recognizing that it's a very similar stimulus, right? So, you know, thousands of years ago, we didn't have recorded music. We would all sit around the campfire and kumbaya, sing, drum circle, dance together, right? Like that's where we got that stimulation from. And not that there's anything wrong with recorded music, but I've definitely found that it's a great practice for me to, experiment with some of the time that I'm feeling that desire, that urge to either self-stimulate, sing to myself, be silly, right? Get into my playful like actress mode, entertain myself, right? Or seek out conversations and play with friends to fill that desire. Yeah, just instead of always relying on recorded audio to meet that need.
Absolutely. And that awareness turns passive listening into an act of alignment. It's beautifully empowering.
It is. It's beautiful. Intention, like literally just applying intention to anything, uh, like upgrades the process.
I absolutely agree. So, music as a mirror. How have you used it in your own journey of self reflection or even shadow work?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of room for music as a way to process shadow work or to process the shadow. Uh, I love coming back just to emotions. I have friends who are really into interacting with the shadow as archetypes, and there's definitely room for that. Whatever resonates most with people. For me, how using music as shadow work most directly applies is that in moments where maybe I'm sensing that there's some anger in me, maybe anger, maybe grief, whatever the emotion is, and I'm struggling to tap into it. I can't quite tap into it, but it's been persistent. I'm noticing side effects of it in my internal and external experience, and let's say it's sadness, and I'll start to feel experience some mild frustration and like gosh, like if I could just cry, right? Like I want to have the somatic catharsis and process the emotion and let it move. But maybe I'm having a hard time tapping into that. And I know in my life there is a negative habit that I learned. I mean, positive in some ways in that it gets me to my goal, but negative in the sense that it creates rupture in relationships. Where if I'm feeling that way and I'm like, gosh, I just subconsciously, right? I'm like, I really need to let this out, let this anger out, or let this sadness out. In the past, I have reacted to that by like, for example, picking a fight with a friend or with my partner, in order to just have something poke me, right? So that I can express that feeling. Okay. So a much more constructive, generally, way to um, mindfully poke ourselves per se to let out that emotion is through music, right? So I can go look for a song that I know will poke or um, let out the emotion that I'm already feeling. Find a song that I'm I'm aware will trigger tears, right? And sometimes all I need is even just a little bit of the song. Sometimes I want to listen to it all the way through. The point being that it helps me access what's more deeply inside and it helps give permission. It's validating, right? The singer, the songwriter on the other side of my device, they seem to be feeling that same way. So it's very validating to my nervous system. And then I can, it's like, a dam opens, right? And suddenly my feelings are able to come out and to express themselves and to process. And hooray, I did all of that without creating, unnecessary drama in my life, and still ended up at the same cathartic result.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So, is there a song you have had to break up with because it no longer matched your identity?
I have broken up with a lot of songs. I have many times over deleted songs off of my, my favorites or my liked songs playlist, and then oftentimes added them back in at later points in my life while having a new relationship with them. So, I mean, there was a long time that I didn't listen to country music. I I listened to almost no of the religious music that I grew up with, but there are some songs now, some Christian rock songs that I genuinely enjoy. They have a different meaning to me now, but I still enjoy them. Um, I would say most of the songs on my liked songs playlist on Spotify were at one point on there and then deleted and added back in. Um, just as I've gone through different shifts in my life. And I found that um, with music or with other things, just to be very helpful in my evolution, like to recognize like I can let go of anything anytime, and if it's meant to be, like it'll come back around. It doesn't mean that I'm saying you're not for me forever. It just means you're not for me right now. Um, and then honoring that if it does come back around, like it doesn't have to be something that we can't let back in just because it didn't resonate in the past. I can dip my toe back in. I can be like, how does this country song sound now? Or how does this alternative rock song sound now? Or this neo spiritual music that I kind of got tired of a few years ago when I was playing it nonstop, right? How does it sound now? Which is all about having that present moment intentionality, recognizing like, hey, I'm a totally different person right now than I was like 2 seconds ago when we started talking talking about this, right? So I could have a totally different relationship with the song uh, now than I did, an hour ago or 2 days ago or certainly 5 years ago.
Mhm, absolutely. And so many of us cling to soundtracks that belong to older version of ourselves. And thank you for reminding us that we can outgrow noise.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's
Mhm. So, as someone who works with men on confidence and expression, how do you use music in that healing space?
that's a great question. I have just this past year started using tuning forks in my practice, which could be included under music depending on how openly we want to define music. Certainly, it's a part of sound healing. And the other way, and this is something I've been aware of for years, I the other way that I incorporate uh, music might be too generous of a term, but sound healing into my practice is through my voice. And sometimes there is like right now, a sing-songiness to my voice, or sometimes I'm simply humming or making noises. It's very, very intuitive. Even when I'm just speaking though, and I think this is really important for us to recognize as humans, that the vibration, the tone, and the rate of our voices conveys information regardless of what our words are saying. There's been research that's been done that shows that ultimately how we say something, for most people, how we say something is more impactful than what we say. Meaning that the music that we're making with our words is more impactful, the melody is more impactful than the lyrics. Most people will respond more to the melody of our language, of our speech, than they will to our lyrics. So I do my best. I practice being mindful of that with clients, recognizing that how I am in my being, meaning, so for example, I have a very strong practice of being authentic, and that's a certain energy, a certain resonance that I carry in me relatively strongly. And if I want to not force them to be authentic, but if I want to offer them the opportunity to be authentic, more authentic in their lives, and to learn that from me, one of the best things that I can do is to be mindful of how that energy transfers through the energy of my speech, even more so than my words, the energy of my speech. So that may be a leap from music per se, but at some level, I would say that that's maybe the essential music of this world that we live in is resonance, is vibration, is energy.
That fusion of rhythm and release, it feels like sacred ceremony disguised as Spotify. So, with such a rich background, from theater to intimacy work, how has music remained your constant thread of truth?
Music is so personal. There's not. I think it's music is one of the experiences of life that is more easily, I think, made personal. Not that we all are consciously aware of that. Like, for example, until I started becoming more self-aware and practicing that self-awareness, my music preferences were to some degree enmeshed in the people around me and the people who had introduced me to that music. But there's something to be said for when I'm listening to a song, I'm the only one listening to that song. It becomes a radically individual experience, while, yes, at the same time being collective. We could say that too, and we could go into the nuance of that, but there is the potential there for a radically individual experience. And at many times in my life, I have felt this sense of being very alone in my experience, feeling very alone. Just the kind of the reality being like no one can really understand what I'm experiencing. From whether that was in high school and going through really debilitating illness and being, feeling very alone amongst my peers in that, whether that was going into hospitals and doctors' offices frequently and then going out into the everyday world and walking among the public and feeling again like, gosh, like how many of these people can actually appreciate this experience that I'm having, on the regular, to later working as a sex worker and having similar experience with that. Like, how many people can really appreciate not only like that I'm working as a sex worker, but that like I'm working as a conscious sex worker. Like, I actually really enjoy it. I'm doing deep work here with these men. The work seems to be like much more of a health provider persona than at least the idea that I had of sex work prior to going into it. Um, and even now, 6 years into building my business, um, and having a very self-driven lifestyle, like, how many people can really appreciate that? We all can in our own way, those of us who are doing similar things. And yet there's something so, I think, precious about getting in touch with ourself in a way that's like, you know what? As much understanding as I may have with anyone else ever, like, I'm the only one that has the opportunity to understand myself, um, to the depths and the extent that is possible. And I've found that music is very helpful with that space because of how personal it becomes, especially when listening to by ourselves.
Mhm. I love that. It reminds us that we are all curating a living, breathing soundtrack, and it deserves to be intentional.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm. So, whether it's healing, heartbreak, or rebirth, music holds it all. And tonight, thanks to Rose Leopold, we have been reminded that the songs we choose can shape the stories we live. If this episode sparked a memory or a melody in you, share it, rethink your playlist, and most of all, listen like it matters. Because in sacred harmony, your truth finds its tune. So until next time, keep humming your soul's song.